Well, welcome everybody. Today's episode is an interesting one, I think. It kind of came up in one of our prep calls for this episode, and it was something that I never really heard before. Brian brought it up. It's what's the difference between a dad and a father? And it's something that kind of came up when we were thinking about bringing some guests onto the show. And for me, it's something that I think that we should only have model guests on the show or model dads on the show. I think we should have all sorts of dads on the show to get their perspectives. And when I brought that up, Brian's kind of thought was, what's what's it mean to be a dad or what's it mean to be a father? So I never really heard that before, really. And it sounded like Brian has put some thought into that. And I think today's episode is something that can kind of really ground us in terms of what we want to be as a show or a podcast. So today's episode is what does it mean to be a dad versus a father? So Brian, what does that mean to you?
All right. I have actually put a lot into this question, into this question. For me, and you and I talk quite a bit, obviously. Titles, like I like titles, like I like to look at like what does a title actually mean. And I think the simplest kind of purest form of it is the level of involvement. Like I've always been kind of brought up like anybody can be a father, right? That's kind of a biological investment, so to speak. But it's you have to work to be a dad. So for me, I think a great example, like my father, like my biological, father, was never really a dad to me. Like he just didn't do any of the things that I consider a dad should do, right? So there's parameters on like, if you want to be a dad, I think you have to do certain things to actually be dad. Where my stepdad and even my father-in-law and whatnot, like they actually meet those parameters to be more of a like a dad-like figure. So for me, a father is just somebody who has a child, like it's a gentleman who has a child, or a dad is actually putting in work to be part of that person's life, right? And when I think of dad, generally I think of kids, right? Except dads stay with you forever for the most part until they're no longer here. Um, and it's how does that go? So for me, being a father entails like investing into your child or into the child. If you're a step parent, same kind of thing. You could be a stepdad. I think there are differences between a dad and a stepdad, depending on what the age is. That makes it a little bit different, and it depends on if dad is involved. So if you have dad and stepdad, then again, those are two entirely different things. Where that gets a little bit mixed is if you have someone who steps in when kids are super young and they don't really know better. Um, and it's like more
We
of
can
an
get into
adopted
that.
dad. Yeah.
We can get into that if you want, Brian, because I know that's something that's very involved in
Yeah.
your life, and I mean that's a big part of your life.
Yeah.
So if you want to get further into that,
We can. So let's go ahead and for me, like I have some tenets that I live by as a dad. Like it's like actually it's just three things that rules that I really follow pretty strictly. My kids follow them, or they know them. I don't really follow them, but they know what they are. And for me, like dads, you have to show up. And I mean, like all the time. Like you have to show up, and it doesn't have to be like you have to physically be there. Like kids actually can be pretty understanding, and kids are super smart. But showing up is, it's a phone call if you can't be there. It's um, going to events that you do should be there for. So like music concerts and showing up for those things. Going just it's the little things that you say you're going to do and the little things that you should be there for. You're showing up. Um, and then it's just if you can't show up physically, it's how can I show up emotionally, right? So it's is it a phone call? Is it, a text message? Is it a letter? Depending, and again, you got to modulate these depending on your kids. So showing up is a big one for me. Defaulting to no, like, and that's actually a kind of a complex one because it's defaulting to no as in I tell my kids no all the time. but it's never like just a hard no. It's no, you can't do these right now, and I need to know why, or I need to know more. So like defaulting to no is I actually want to know my kids, and I want my kids to know me as a person. So it's not like I'm just dad and I am, all powerful because I'm your parent, but I want to know like what are you thinking? Like tell me, like let's have conversations. Um, and I mean, I'm not completely transparent with my kids. Obviously, there is some, like I call it dad privilege. Like I get to know all of their problems. They don't get to know my problems unless I choose to share them. And then the third one's actually just pretty simple. Just be consistent with showing up and wanting to know your kids, like actually get to know who they are. I think that makes being a dad a little bit, it's if you follow those two pieces and it's not just pretty much any relationship, you're going to figure out how to build a good relationship um,
So
with your
defaulting
kids.
defaulting to no, that's what's the right way to say it? Double entendre, is that what it means? Is that what you mean by it? Like no as in the N-O no and no as in K-N-O-W no kind of thing?
Correct. Correct.
Okay.
Um, my general response is like, when they ask me for stuff that I don't think they should have, obviously the answer is like, hey, no, like you can't have candy right now because, it's dinner time. Or my middle daughter wanted to do she's like, Dad, I'm going to do dance camp. Don't worry about it. I'll figure it out for you. So I was like, I need to know more. Right. And it happened to be the one she found was in New Hampshire. So that one ended up just being a hard no because, she's 11. And I'm not sending her to New Hampshire by herself for like a month with people I've never met before. It's just something I'm uncomfortable with. Um, her mother, actually, everybody I've talked to is in agreement that that's just a hard no. But I wanted to know more. So then it's like, okay, like what about this dance thing did you like? And then we had a conversation about what are you looking for this summer? So yeah, so there's never just a hard no for me. Well, not never. Generally speaking, I don't just say no if it's something that I think warrants discussion, and vast majority of things warrant discussion, in my opinion. So,
So there's well, let's get into this piece first because when I was trying to get my thoughts down for this episode, I I was just trying to think it through because this is something I never really thought about. So I wrote down dad versus father.
mhm,
Like people can see it if they want, whatever.
yeah.
Um, so I had it the other way. So I thought the father was the one that's present, the one put your phones down, the one that you actually want to be. Whereas um, the other one is the opposite of that, right? One that kind of, I think you put it as one that's just there, one that just kind of listens to the wife or the mother. Why is it dad in your eyes is the one that you want to be, and then father is just, oh, you just had a kid.
I guess for me, it's kind of my dad. Like I said, for me, like I never really talk like with my dad. Like he was more of a father, right? Like never showed up. He was so I would call him father because he didn't like it, and I thought it was funny. But that being said, like my
Okay.
kids do call me like when I'm aggravating my kids, right? And like we're having, a discussion that's not going in the direction they want. Sometimes I'll be like, I accept your terms, father. So like that's so kind of how it is. On all the shows like that, people are relieved, like Murray and all those like trash TV shows, like, you are the father or you are not the father. So that's just kind of how I always took it is, the father signs the birth certificate. But I've known a lot of really great dads, like my stepdad, John, like, he came and he adopted my sister when she was real little. Like he came into my life when I was like 12 and taught me a lot of stuff. He really kind of stepped in and, even today, like I'll call him and just like have conversations and be like, hey, like, what are your thoughts on this? And it's more of a, it's more of an equal conversation now because, I'm, an adult, but I've always had that opportunity to go to him with like, dad type conversations if I want, or with Darla and her parents, it's, obviously I just call them by their names, but if I have like a question, it's a respectful exchange where it's a little bit different. But she's still like it's her dad. So for me, I've never known anybody who's really close to their parent that calls them, um, father or anything. It's always like, oh, it's my dad or whatnot. So that's just kind of how I took it. I mean, I call my mom mother sometimes, and it's not like I love my mother, like she's an awesome mom. But sometimes it's just like me being a kind of a butt. So
Mm.
that's just kind of how it was for me. Like father's always like that, you have your mother and you have your father, and like this is how your family tree is. Um, so that's just how I was introduced to the words for the most part.
Okay.
So, and I
I
always
guess
think
I asked
about,
you that. Go ahead.
yeah, and I always think about if I want to be a great dad, what do I have to do? Because, my kids call me dad. So,
Yeah, and the reason I asked you that is you started off and you were saying you were very into titles, so I know that
yeah,
you were very looking into the words.
yeah,
So I mean, like I said, I never really thought about the dad versus father. So after hearing what you had to say, I mean I would agree. It's kind of it's like home versus house kind of thing.
yeah,
So it's kind of like the informal or sorry, the formal father is like that's how you would say it in like an essay or something. And
correct.
then when you get down to the informal, you get to dad, and when you really think about it, when your kids are comfortable and you take care of them, you are all the things that you say,
Mhm.
present, you show up. That's when you get to be a dad. That's when you earn the title of dad. So
Correct.
I definitely agree with that.
Yeah.
So I was gonna, I when I kind of mentioned to you to kind of go deeper, I know unfortunately we're in a world where divorce is common,
Hmm.
about 50% or close to that or whatever it is now. Last I heard, that's where it is. So I was a little bit more interested in hearing what your experience was with being a stepdad and that stephood or whatever that word is for you. What does that mean? Like you were talking about it's okay if they're younger, and can you
Yeah.
get into a little bit of that? Because I know
Uh,
that probably our audience is
I
used to
can.
stuff like that.
I can. So it's interesting. I personally am not a stepdad. Um, so my kid situation, my two older kids are from my previous marriage, and then my daughter's with me. That being said, my two older kids, they do have, their mom is remarried to a great gentleman, and that's their stepdad, but they definitely don't call him dad. Like that was for them, like that was something they weren't comfortable with, and he's a super great guy. It's nothing that he pushes, so he's just cool, like being called by his name, like he interacts, like he gives them direction. Um, my ex-wife and I have like parenting parameters that we set up, like these are my expectations. And she is a great parenting partner because we really like communicate. It's always about the kids, never about like our stuff that was, negative in the past or um a lot of that we've been over it 'cause it's been a long time. Um, but it's always,
What are those? What are those parameters?
that we stay
If you
within.
don't,
So
if
like
you don't mind.
yeah, when we first had our kids, it was no really big decisions without a conversation. So and we stick by that pretty good. I mean, like, great example. My son is very into athletics. Like he's really into fitness. Like he's a wrestler. He has some very lofty goals that he is actively working to attain. And if we're going to take and put him into a specific wrestling program, she'll be like, "Hey, Brian, you go, you know, look at it, bring me information, right? What your thoughts are." And I'll bring him to her, and then we'll have a discussion on, okay, are we going to do this? And if she's not on board, she'll be like, "Hey, like I think we need to wait till here." And I'll be like, "Okay, like I understand your viewpoint." And sometimes there's a little, personality stuff where like I really I get really excited to tell her stuff, and she's like, "Hey, shh, let me get this out," and then I'll listen, and okay, I understand. So okay, I understand where you're coming from. Here's where I'm coming from. We'll just have these, discussions on it, or other kid activities, whatever it is. We have open discussions. The way we discipline our kids, like that was, before like we had a different philosophy when we had kids. So like we're getting a little deeper in this, a little deeper. Uh, when we had kids, we did not have kids to, and for me, this is like all of my children. I did not have kids for the sake of having kids. I had kids because I wanted to bring something better than myself into the world. That was my goal as a parent, like to take in what can I bring into the world that's going to do good and going to have a really positive impact, and how can I provide everything to them in a way to make them great people and the best versions of themselves. Where some people have kids to, make, I don't necessarily think this is the best reason to have a kid. Like I know some people they're like, hey, I needed somebody, so I had a kid, and now my kid's my best friend. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm saying that's not for me. But since that's how we decided to have children, and like things like that, where we just really want to bring something great into the world, and we want our kids to be fantastic people first, we have really decided, hey, like we're not big on spankings or like physical, like that. Like we have a lot of discussions. So there are hard rules, right? Like I'm pretty strict, but we have discussions about them. So like that's how we do it. If one of them, and I'll say moms, because if a mom that I'm in, have a child with says, hey, like this is what we're doing to the kid, um, even if I don't agree with it, this is what we're doing. And then her and I will have a discussion offline that the kids do not need to see. Um, Same thing other way. If I say, hey, this is what we're doing, and they don't agree, they'll be like, they're not going to say anything to the kids. I never say anything disparaging uh, about either, mom to in front of the kids. Like, and it's the same thing. So like even when we disagree, or the kids will bring stuff up and they'll be like, oh, like I'm really frustrated, mom did this, and I'll be like, well, that's your mom. Like you, what are you going to do about it? Like, well, dad, I think you should have my back on this one. I'm like, I love you, but like your mom's right on this. So those are some of the parameters that we agreed on. For discipline, um, pretty lucky at this point. I don't really have to discipline my kids that often. In my house, I would do it with my older two. Like I just kind of took care of it, but I, unless it was like a safety issue, like your kid's running in the street, then you don't really, whatever. Uh, Anybody should discipline your kid at that point to be like, hey, like let's not, get run over by a car. So we've really, those are the parameters. Like, hey, like if it's discipline, like we're gonna have that conversation together. We're gonna choose the path forward. If it's an activity, education, like we really work as a team. We bring our opinions together, and then once we agree, like, or once the decision is made, is better. It's like once the decision is made, we're both on board, even if it's not my decision, right? Where I'm like, ooh, like I would not have chosen that, but if that's what we've agreed on, like then I'm on board, and we're going in that direction. Um, so like those are some of the parameters that we have for parenting. Anytime the kids want to, have phone calls with, a parent or a FaceTime or whatever it is, like they just have to ask. Like there's never this is my time, you can't see, your, other parent. Like it's never like that. Um, it's always what are the kids' needs versus, those always outweigh, mine, or, as a parent, like if I'm just like, oh, I want that time, but they need time somewhere else. I always put the kids' needs first, and we have that discussion about it. Um, if they want to hang out with the other parent, or if they wanted to go, do something with, Enrique is their step parent. If they want to go do something with Enrique because he does something that I don't do, I don't take that personal. Like that's if he wants to be involved and be awesome, by all means, be involved and be awesome with my, you know, teach them something. So I don't have a problem with that. Same thing, like my stepdad uh loves to fish. And he's like, hey, I'm gonna take the kids, I want to take you and teach your kids to fish. By all means, like if you can teach them something that I'm not going to, or I can't, that's how I treat it. Um, but it's, a very open, like, hey, here's what it is. And if it's, taking another parent's time, so if I need extra time, like like this week, uh, I need to pick the kids up on Thursday because Braden, made it to state, so he's gonna wrestle Friday. So I gotta pick him up early. I've already talked to his mom about it. She knows, like, hey, like we're changing dates around, we're changing times around, or if somebody's getting married and she needs them for a weekend, then I have them, or if I'm gonna be on vacation for a week, it's just always being open with communication and not emotional about it. So like if she's doing something cool with the kids, or if I'm doing something cool, I'm not jealous that I can't do it. I'm excited that the kids get this opportunity, and you know, and I'm happy for them. So I always put it, it's kind of a kid centric, but it's not like um in a spoiled kind of way, because we parent pretty strictly. Like we kind of got into some of the stuff, like there's no social media, like there's no dating, like um if if you make bad decisions, like there are consequences. So yeah.
Okay. I mean, I think there's some things I needed to stop myself from going deeper into because there's some things in there that I wanted to follow up on. I think discipline is going to be an episode for sure. So that is something that we're going to talk about in the future.
Yeah, I think that'll
Another
be
one is, go
an
ahead.
interesting one. There's another dad that I've been talking to, that I think will be an interesting one to bring on to that as well. So
That and also the reason for having a kid. I think that's something I also would want to get into.
yeah.
But I mean, I can't really speak to it. I mean, I was kind of going off of your experience. You have that extended family. Hopefully, that's not something I have to deal with in the future for my kids. So, not trying to
It's
say
just
anything about yours, but
Well, it's just the situations. I think it's as
yeah,
you do, if you get into that situation, I think it's being really honest about who you are and what your needs are up front. And
yeah,
then, you are marrying, like, I think when you get married, like obviously it's your family, but you're marrying, adjacent to another family. So, and then it's how
yeah.
do those people handle bringing new people in? Um, and some people do it great. Like I said, like my stepdad is, treats all of the grandkids the same and does a great job. Darla's parents, again, like my two older kids, like are technically not their grandkids like by blood at all, right? But they treat my children fantastically. Like all the grandkids get treated the same because kids are kids, and it is not fair to a child to be like, oh, like since like you're not quite fitting in here, so I'm gonna treat you different. And they don't do that. Like my kids are treated just like the other grandkids. Same thing on like um my two older kids, like their stepdad's mom like is very kind to them, includes them. So it's big conversations that are kind of hard sometimes if you're getting it. Like we could do a whole like my life has taken a turn episode, and like what should you do? Because I can say, looking back, I did some things that were not in my best interest, and were not in the best interest of everybody involved. Um, but looking back on it, like vision, hindsight is always 2020. Sometimes better
I
than
mean,
2020.
hearing you talk about, I guess, the hindsight, it sounded like that experience that you had made you the the, the dad that you are, and it had an impact on how you communicated,
Hmm.
how maybe even reevaluated how you want to be a dad, or I guess even reaffirmed it even maybe. And you being separated once from a marriage, it helped you just kind of set the ground rules for what you wanted and needed, and how it makes it more difficult because I guess I'll put that to you if it was more difficult or not, but it it made it seem like you needed to make sure that there was a plan when you had that separation because you had two
Hmm.
individuals that are small, rely on you, and you needed to make sure that they were okay. And I mean, going off the purpose of why you had kids, you needed to make sure that they were going to be okay. They were going to be the people that you wanted them to be. So is that true?
It is. It took all the easy out of it, right? Like uh with my youngest, it is easier to dad because she is always here. So like if she wants something, like she was up this morning before we had this podcast, we're up pretty early, and she came in and she's like pushing me, because she wanted to snuggle, right? That's easy, right? It's a Sunday morning, she wants to snuggle, she could just come in and do that. Where for my older two, if they need something, it's a drive. Like I'm going to get them. I'm going to plan this. Like it forced me to work harder to give them the same. And even before I had my youngest, I would drive up several times a week, an hour there, an hour back to get 30 minutes of time. So like when they were in daycare and stuff, I was like, if they needed the time, I would drive and I'd have lunch with them because, the daycare that they went to was in a small town. Everyone was super cool. I'd bring them snacks. I'd, eat with them for 10, 15 minutes and then they'd go play, or we'd, play, and then I would drive to work. So, 2 hours investment for 30 minutes of time which is probably more like, I watch them play for 20 minutes and I get 10 minutes to, eat with them or whatever, or to hold them or whatever they needed that day. Um, and then talking on the phone when they were real little, like even when they couldn't talk very well, it was, hey, like, I need you to tell me about your day. And we just have like little phrases where, I'd ask them a question. Um, I call it call and response, where I'd ask them a question and they would respond to me, and I would talk to their mom. So even when her and I were in not an ideal spot, it was very focused on like how do we make sure that they're getting what they need. So it made me work very hard to be there. So like just being there, I had to be engaged. I had to show up. I had to just put in more work. So yeah, I'd agree with that.
I guess I would ask you something that popped into my head. Do you think there are times like you're saying, excuse me, your youngest comes in the morning. I mean, we're doing this 6:30 in the morning. So the cuddle at like probably 6 or whatever.
Hmm.
Do you think there are times where your other two children are wanting that, but they don't call you, or you're missing an opportunity
I
where
mean,
they want to do that?
probably. I mean, it's my oldest is still pretty big cuddler. Like he'll just tell me like, hey, what does he call it? He's like, Dad, I have OCD or OLCD or something like that. It's like it's LOCD. Yeah, it's like it's lack of cuddle disorder. And he'll be like, so then he'll like set up a little area and he's like, we're gonna watch this show and we're gonna, cuddle. So then, we just kind of like lay on the floor together and stuff like that. And kind of go from there. When they were littler and like, my middle is like that. She's not as cuddly as the other two. Like that's just not in her personality, but she still does when she needs it. Like she'll come and sit with me or whatever. So I think they probably do miss out on it uh to a degree. But it's if they ever need anything, like they've always been able to call me. Like I will get it depends on how school is, depends on how much homework they have right now. And their athletic stuff. If they need a call, like I'll get a call, and it depends. Each kid has the call is just a different, flavor kind of cadence. My middle will just talk. Like she's just loves to talk, and we will talk for 30 minutes to an hour. Um, and she'll just tell me about her day and stuff. And then my boy, it's more like a brief. Like he tells me everything that he has, everything that he needs, and then it's how are you? So it's practical information first that is delivered with questions that are answered that he needs. And then it's like, oh, how are you, by the way? And again, that's a personality thing.
I guess I would ask you, when I'm trying to put myself in your situation, with you maybe knowing that you're missing those opportunities, how do you deal with that? Is that something that you had to learn to just deal with, or Is that something you just know that you just can't be there, or just have it the same as your youngest? How is it
You just have
that
to be
you
present.
deal with
I
that
mean,
mentally?
you just have to be present. Like when you're with your kids, you're with your kids, and you try to be present. I try to be present as much as I can. As they get older, it gets easier, right? But when they were real little, and you'll experience this if you haven't already, when it gets warm outside, because it's frigid right now. I used to, so I would drive up every week and I would have dinner with my kids, and then I would take them to the park and we would play in the park. And I would be there with a bunch of other dads doing the same thing that were in similar situations. And a lot of the other dads would sit on their phones and they'd let their kids play in the park, where I would play with my kids. Like, and I was, when I first started this, I was not what I would call, I was a little chunkier than I am now. And so like I would be dying because like they want to play tag, they want to run around. I got two kids. So like they were smart enough to be like, hey, we're gonna go in opposite directions. So like I'd be like sweating, like dying, like actually playing with my kids or doing whatever, or I'm pushing them on the swings. Like I'd be actively involved. Like um I'd either have my phone in my pocket or sometimes I would just leave it in the car because their mother would know where I was. Like we're in the park, like small town. It's like, hey, there's two parks. If I'm not here, I'm at the other one if you need me. And it was just focused on those kids. Um, which inevitably, if you're the one dad that's focused on his kids playing a game, you will pull in other children. So, all of a sudden we'd have a game where it's just me and my kids kind of playing tag, and all of a sudden every single kid at the park is playing tag. And being the one adult, you will be it the most. And you slow down over time because you're chunky monkey.
Yeah,
But it,
interesting.
yeah, but there just weren't a lot of dads that were involved, or even moms. Like they would just sit there, or they would kind of chat with each other, whatever they're talking about, because I didn't care. Like I was there to be with my kids. So it comes back
Yeah.
to just being present and
When you
whatnot.
told me about how you interact with your kids at the park, I mean, it made me want to interact with them more. I think the more stories we can give out like that, the better. We have a neighborhood park in our nearby us, and after you said that, I really noticed how parents are in the
Hmm.
park and how they're just on the sidelines for the most part. And we during the winter we took Jace to like that mall playground kind of thing, and it's the same situation.
Hmm.
And I guess what's interesting to me when I say that is the the way your life is set up, it has kind of shaped how your views are, I think,
Hmm.
because you don't have a lot of time with your kids as far as I can see. And the minimal amount of time that you have with them, and I would say you would agree because I mean you'd want to spend 100% of your time with them
Oh, of
versus
course.
how much you get now. But the I don't know if it's 40, 30% or 50% or whatever it is, you want to spend all of that time getting the most out of it, getting to know your children, getting to be present. Whereas if you're 100% of the time with your kids and you're maybe that father, you take it for granted.
Hmm.
So I think that's really kind of shaped your views in terms of what you think is a good dad and those kind of things. And I think, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. I think like there's a lot to that. I think you are correct. Like, and I am not 100% engaged 100% of the time. Like, I don't think anybody can, but like when I am, I am. And I'll tell my kids like, hey, I need downtime or whatnot. I think the other part is, and this is we've talked about this. I think there's like generational patterns. Like my father never showed up for anything. Like the man like did not give a shit like at all. And I didn't want to be that, like so I think that was a big part of it too. Like to have a dad, or father, whatever, that was such a stellar role model of disappointment also colored my vision of like I can't do that because I know how it made me feel and I know how it impacted my life negatively. So then I kind of swung all the way to the other
Gotcha.
side of
I guess I
interaction.
would ask you, and we're about to wrap, and I want to get back to this question again, or the topic of the podcast. I guess I would ask you, if you didn't have that father experience that you had with your dad or your father, I guess, what if you had the dad that you are as your dad, how would that have changed things? Would you still think that you have the same views? Would you want to try to be the same dad, or would you think that dad is easy because my dad did it this way, or do you think that you may have became a father?
No, I think I'd be the same, and the reason being
And I
is I
guess I
have
would ask you, frame it around how other dads and fathers are out there. How would, don't just think about it from your perspective, but how can other dads and or fathers um, kind of come into this podcast and say, "Oh, I'm a father. How do I become a dad?"
I would think that if you're we'll use the park example. If you interact more with your dog at the dog park because you're playing fetch than you do with your kids at the park with your kids because you're just watching them, then you're probably lopsided, right? Um, I think anytime you have an opportunity to know your kids, right? Like take that time. Like I do once a year, I try to take each kid and we do something just the two of us. And it could like the girls I take out and we just go to dinner. So like they kind of see how like, you know, what I'm thinking about and like kind of like, hey, like this is how like, people should treat you and stuff like that. So it's kind of like there's big pieces of that, but it's like it's just us time. They do that with their mothers as well. And then my son, like we have bro time, right? Because like a mandate's a weird name for it. But we have bro time. So like yeah. So we'll go out and we'll do something and like it's kind of evolved into now we take vacations where I'll take a small vacation with each kid. Um, my son is generally some kind of fitness event. Like this year, we're going to Colorado for youth nationals, most likely, so that he can compete. For my other daughters, like my middle daughter has all kinds of crazy ideas. Like she's like, we should just go to Disney, Dad. We'll just leave my siblings there. I was like, that's not gonna work. But we'll do something for her that, whatever it is. And then my littlest, she gets the most time and then she'll kind of choose what she wants. So I think if invest that time. Like, and if it's getting in the way of your hobbies or anything, like, um, choose what you can sacrifice for yourself and then give that time to your kids if you can. And I know like people work different. Like I'm pretty blessed, with my work schedule, and I understand that. But if it's getting up a little earlier to have breakfast with your kids, or if it's staying up a little bit later, or if it's, whatever it is, just find that time and just be in, like, give them, if it's just 1 hour, give them 1 hour of your time, like where you're actively giving, I think that's how to change. You have to actively give that time to be present. Um, if, if you're not, then you're not showing them what they, you're not showing them the value that they have to you. Um, So yeah, like so if you want to transition to be a more involved dad, show up more. And again, showing up can be super easy. Like it could be a phone call, it could be a text message, it could be a walk around the block. If you got a dog, you can walk the dog together. And there's a great opportunity for you not to have to pick up a turd. You can just make your kids do it. And there's a life lesson that you can, make up there if you want. But you just need to be actively involved. I think that's how to turn that corner and just realize that relationship will evolve over time. So when they're one or two, that active involvement is different than 3 to 4, 5 to 6, and so on and so forth. So I think we're going to go ahead and kind of wrap up here. Recap. Uh, for me, being a good dad, I think it's not easy, right? It's simple, but it's not easy. The big thing is that you got to show up, right? And it's how you got to show up, and you got to be consistently showing up, and you got to consistently, want to learn and know more about your kids. They cannot be their friends, um, but you got to want to know them, right? So you got to know what their interests are, stuff like that. So I think if you're on that kind of cusp where you find yourself wanting, a little bit more, or like you're not as engaged with your kids as you could be, when you have those opportunities to really show up, again, if they're little and you take them to the park where you're playing with them, you can bring a ball, baseball, whatever. Um, just show up. I mean, you don't even need to bring stuff. You can play tag. Kids love tag, hide and seek, stuff like that. But it's just being actively engaged, all of the time that you can like be engaged, right? So it's, obviously can't do it 100% of the time, but it's how do you do that? I think those are the big ones for me is you got to show up. Like if you consistently show up, and want to know more about your kids and you want them to know you, and you'll have a better time. Like it'll force you to be a better dad.
Okay, cool. It kind of reminds me of what I was thinking when you were talking about, how did you put it? Always going to know or assuming that no or something like that.
Yep,
How did you
defaulting.
defaulting to no? Made me really think about uh, our episode 0. If you haven't seen it, go see it. Brian's writing a book, so it seems like he's already kind of putting some slogans together about things you should do as a dad. So that's what I thought about when you were talking about that. But I
Yeah.
wanted to bring it back to the topic of the podcast, dad versus father, right? So for you, Brian, how do you see us bringing people into this circle? Or uh, I mean, eventually we want to create a community, I would assume, of dads where we're all kind of have similar goals and things like that. But what would you do if we brought a dad on that is a father? How would you kind of interact or interview that person where
So
we have kind of separate thoughts or goals about what it means to be a dad? How would you gradually bring that person in and say, oh, maybe not necessarily you're not doing the right thing, but how kind of to shed the light on kind of both sides of of the coin?
so I think it's a great question. I think the way I would go about it is I'd probably interview most people the same way, right? And I think that one thing that you have to ask yourself or realize, right? Something that I ask myself is like when I'm making a decision as dad, right? Um, am I being the dad that I would want if I were like for my kid, like if I'm in the kid's shoes, am I being the dad that I would want or am I being the dad that I would need? Sometimes those things go hand in hand, right? I love those times. Those times make my life so easy when it's like the dad they want, the dad they need, it's the same dad. Where you run into conflict is when the dad they want is the opposite of the dad they need. So I think those are the questions. And I always give them the dad they need first. So I think asking yourself that question, is it the dad they want or the dad they need? And always defaulting to the dad they need. Um, I think that's very important, right? Because it's gonna kind of dictate how you parent. The other one is again, if you're consistently showing up, you're consistently wanting to be more, like you just have to ask yourself, like, what do you want? And the only person who can actually tell you if you're a good dad is it's your kid. Like you have to act like that interaction, that relationship, like you have to step back and really ask yourself, am I being a good dad? Like would they say I'm a good dad? And if good, if the answer is no, okay, like why not? If the answer is like, yeah, probably most of the time, okay, like, well, why? If you want to be a great dad, like there's more to it, right? And I talk about this with my kids all the time. There's a difference between like being okay is okay, right? But if you want to go from okay to good, it's not to go from bad to okay is minimal effort. To go from bad or okay to good is, you know, more effort. It's probably two or three times the amount of effort from okay to good. And then, good to great is probably 10 times the effort. And then, to be exceptional, you're truly exceptional. It's the amount of work is astronomically different than to be okay. So you have to ask yourself that. You have to ask yourself, am I being good? Am I being great? Am I being exceptional? And just being honest. And would my kid see it that way? And not is my kid mad at me because I took something away, but like when I'm engaged and involved, do they know they can rely on me? Do they know that I'm showing up? Um, am I the dad that I want to be? And do my kids see that? So I think you got to ask yourself though. So I would ask them some of those questions. What does it mean to be a dad to you? Like, give me a proud dad moment that is not an athletic or an academic accomplishment. It's a behavioral accomplishment where they did something where you were just like, that was amazing. Like they were super kind or intelligent or like an actual human skill, not like, oh, my kid won the baseball game because he throws the ball real hard. That's amazing. I'm super happy for you. But not everybody's going to be a professional ball player. And we all know some professional athletes that as a dad, I probably wouldn't be proud of their behavior. Um, so like, let's talk about like what makes them good humans. So that's kind of how I would approach it of like, what does it mean to be a dad to you? What is a good dad? What is a great dad? I wouldn't even start with what's a bad dad. What's good, what's great. And then what do you think your kids would say? And then kind of go from there.
I guess I would ask you, what's how do you grade yourself if one maybe it's just like you just said, just think about what your kids would say. But if you're trying to measure where you're at right now, so you just kind of have like a measuring stick. For me, I have kids that don't talk. So how would you give me advice about where to figure out where I stand?
So this is interesting. When you put in a lot of effort, other people will tell you. Like you don't have to brag for yourself, right? And um, I've had a lot of people unprompted, like will be, having dad conversations or they'll interact with my kids and they'll come up, they'll tell me that I have great kids. So if people are telling you have great kids and it's unprompted, so like you're in a group setting and like, you know what, Van, you got great kids, you're doing a good job as a dad. You and Ian are doing good jobs as parents. So like we talk about dads here, but like moms are an important part of this. You have to have kind of a team dynamic. I'm not saying that you can't do it on your own, but it's different. But for dads, anytime someone tells you that your kids are doing a good job, right? Like, oh, you got great kids is something I get frequently. Oh, your kids are so respectful. Like whatever the important things are to you, if people are telling you that your kids are doing those things, you're probably doing something right. If people tell you, hey, like you're a good dad, you're doing a great job as dad, um, other people will tell you. If nobody ever tells you, either one, you're not really like interacting with a lot of people like in that manner that I've experienced, or um, your kids are not behaving in the way that they would expect. I have people in our family, like we've kind of talked about it, like my wife's one of eight, like I got some siblings. Um, real quick, uh, like I like Joe Rogan, like my son and I were like listening to some stuff with him and Goggins. When people see something that they don't approve of, like that's the first thing they're going to gossip about, right? So like ask yourself if, you know, should you be like, would you prefer they have those conversations with you? So for me, like I've said that to my mom, right? Like, hey, if my kids aren't like, if I'm not doing it, let me know. And my mom is brutally honest. Like I love my mother and I expect that she would tell me if I was doing a bad job. So you have to have those conversations, just like, not like I don't want someone to talk behind my back, like, oh, Brian, his kids are naughty or whatever. Like, no, just tell me my kids are naughty and I will deal with it. So you'll get some feedback from other people. People, notice your kids' behavior. Um, and then it's if you're not, for dads, like it's how close are to your kids, right? Are they, do they want to sit with you? Do they want to be with you? Like I see you all the time, like in a 9 to 5, you'll have a child. Like, oh, there's a minivan. Um,
Yeah.
so I mean, like I think those are some things that say it. Like, some really little kids never want to be around dad, which sometimes isn't your fault. Some kids are just different. Like they just really like one parent. Um, so I think it's, you'll get feedback from other people. It won't just be from yourself. And you just have to you hold yourself really accountable. Like, and for my kids, I ask them, be like, hey, what can I do better? What do you need from me? I don't ever ask them what they want. What do you need from me? Um, and as they get older, like kids will talk about their dads and you'll get surprising feedback. If you are the dad that shows up all the time, you will get really surprising feedback. where other kids, your kids bring, what other dads do to you, and they're like, yeah, like I don't understand like how this happens, or like if you did this, I would be upset. And it's like, okay, like that's the kind of feedback you get. As they get older, it gets easier to get feedback. But people will tell you.
Yeah, I think I'm for me to fix my behavioral habits, I typically need to talk about it and get that feedback. Whereas right now, for me, I have two young kids, and it's just survival, you know.
Yeah.
So, uh, so for me, how I would do it, I definitely want to bring guests in and have them know, just not say it, but have them know as we're kind of interviewing them and talking to them, it's a safe spot. It's a safe place. I don't want them to feel attacked or alienated in any way. I saw a very awkward podcast a couple weeks ago with Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Poor Dad author, and Grant Cardone, and they just disagreed on just not everything, but just how to start. And they're real estate giants, but it was hard not to taste the tension. So I definitely don't want that. I definitely do want a mixture of guests. So
Hmm.
I, for me, I go off of what people say in terms of what's the next question I ask. Typically, and I'll have a couple of questions ready, but I'll typically go off what people say. So for me, I think it's good that I you have me as a co-host because
Yeah.
because the reason I say that is because I'm not completely where you're at in terms of discipline and getting the I don't know the kudos from other people. So there's things that you said today that I might be in that certain group of. I mean, there's things that you're saying about purpose of of having a kid. I don't know if we really thought about that
Most a lot of
in,
people don't, man. Like,
in terms of I think we had not necessarily like 100% idea of why, but I mean I think there was definitely a why we had a kid. So I think for me and you, I think that that's where we're a good match, right?
mhm.
Where we have our differences, and that's where we can, and hopefully for you, Brian, you can see some potential for growth in yourself personally when you
Always.
hear things of my background, and I obviously have taken things from you that you said and try to implement them. So yeah, I mean, for people out there that want to be on our podcast to hear about us, I mean, we're just starting up. Just know that it's not just Brian. So just know that. Uh, but I think that's really it. I mean, we're hopefully going to have a guest next week. Any last thoughts about people that may potentially be on our podcast, Brian?
I think like anybody who does want it, like I think my goal for this is there's not a lot of dad resources. Um, so like when we try to find stuff, there's just not a lot of it. Like there's a lot of support for moms and stuff. So like my goal is I would like to talk to and interview as many dads as possible to get a really wide understanding of different, you know, parenting styles as a dad, like different dadding styles, right? Like I'm not saying that my stuff is right. My stuff works for me and my kids. And again, my life has been very, is mine, right? So I would love to talk to as many people as possible and learn as much as possible and have this podcast be a resource for, new dads that are coming into it, or people that are thinking about, having kids and or people that have older kids, or if you've had like a, whatever. I would like this to be a resource for all dads to hopefully learn something or to teach somebody something so that we can, you know, be good dads together. Like I think it'd be cool to have a community of dads that want to be better and that want to help each other so that we can, teach our kids the skills that will make them great. So
All right, cool. I think that's a good place to wrap up. Good combo, Brian. Talk next week.
Excellent. All right. See you later, man.
See ya.